In this second video, we will look at variations in intellectual ability, beginning with intellectual disability, which is a type of intellectual impairment that begins early in life, which includes deficits in intellectual, social, and adaptive functioning. We used to more narrowly define it as somebody who had an IQ of less than 70. And that was basically the test for whether or not you were intellectually disabled or not. But now we also look at the social and adaptive functioning of the individual. So by social functioning, we mean, do they maintain relationships, and friendships? By adaptive functioning, we mean like, can they manage everyday activities and responsibilities? Can they look after themselves? Can they hold a job? That kind of thing. And so now it can be the case that somebody could have an IQ of under 70, but not be intellectually disabled if they have successful relationships, social relationships, and they can look after themselves and do some kind of work and make money and things like that. And people like that certainly exist. So it's not just based on IQ anymore. Um, Specific learning disorders refers to having persistent and substantial difficulty with learning in reading, writing, or arithmetic. And it cannot be better explained by some other problem. So, in order to diagnose a learning disorder, you have to first eliminate other possible causes for the child's difficulty in school. So they check things like, is there some kind of vision loss going on that could explain maybe some problems, or do they have overall mental impairment? Maybe hearing loss could explain some difficulties. And so you test other causes first, and if you can't find any other cause, then you call it a learning disability. So I mean, there isn't really a good test of like, it's not like you can take a blood test or even a brain scan and see a learning disorder. You have to kind of diagnose it by eliminating all the other possibilities. There are a number of different types of learning disorders. The most common is dyslexia, which is difficulties specific to language skills, in particular reading. I have a video I was going to show, but I've included it now in the other videos folder in Unit 3. It is about dyslexia. It's only about 4 minutes long, so I hope you do go and watch that. And it gives you a better idea of dyslexia and how it's and what the causes are. There are some other learning disorders besides dyslexia. I'm going to mention a few of them. There's dysphagia, which is dysphasia, dysphagia. That is difficulty specifically with spoken language. There's dysgraphia. So think about graphics, graphia is graphia, dysgraphia, and that's difficulties with writing. And then there's dyscalculia, calculia, calculia, and that's as it sounds. That sounds like calculate. So it's actually difficulty with mathematical skills. Once again, dyslexia is the most common of the learning disorders. On the other end of the scale, we have giftedness, which represents children who are functioning at a very high level and have an extraordinary amount of potential for their development. Research on accelerated programs for gifted students that allow them to either skip a grade or to take certain classes at a higher grade. This research has found that these students feel good about themselves when allowed to do that, and they do not feel isolated from their peers when they have to, when they change classes, which was always a concern. Maybe we shouldn't move them up a grade because then they will be with older students and they won't do well socially. But research has shown that they do very well, and that we should have more programs for gifted students and allow them to take more advanced courses or skip up a grade. Your book talks about this 3-ring model of giftedness. I'm not going to get into it. It's basically what it says here, and there's a little picture there. It's just saying that it's a combination of 3 things. You can read more about that in the book. And then we have creativity, which we can define as thinking that is novel and that produces ideas that are of value. So when we look at creativity, we look at divergent thinking in particular. Convergent thinking is when there's one right solution to a problem, and you have to try to pick out the right correct answer, which is what, once again, is what we do mainly in school. When you're given a test item, there's one answer that the teacher is looking for, right? There aren't multiple possible answers. And so Robert Sternberg, once again, going back to him, he does a lot of work in intelligence, and he believes that we should teach more creativity in school, and that we should value it more. And if you remember his triarchic model of intelligence, one of the types was creative intelligence. Creative intelligence relies more on divergent thinking, which is finding as many possible solutions to a problem as possible. So, like, if I was to ask you, what the purpose of a paperclip is, or what let's say I ask you what you can do with a paperclip. I mean, a convergent thinking response is that you use it to hold papers together. But divergent thinking would lead to, many possible uses for that paperclip. You could use it as a bookmark, or you could, like bend the metal apart and then make a ring out of it. I mean, like a divergent creative thinker could come up with a dozen uses for a paperclip. And so going back to Sternberg, he believes that true creativity, at least useful creativity, requires both of these types of thinking, actually, divergent and convergent thinking, so you can identify a practical solution to a problem. That divergent thinking gives you many possibilities, and then he says that you need some convergent thinking in order to, come up with the best solution out of all the possibilities. So you think about divergent thinking as brainstorming, and then convergent thinking helps you arrive at the best solution out of all the possible answers. For creativity, a certain level of intelligence is necessary, but it's not a sufficient condition for creativity. So what that means is that you don't find a lot of creativity usually with people of lower IQs. It's not unheard of in certain special cases, but typically creativity is associated with people that have, average, at least average or above average IQ. But when it says it's not a sufficient condition, what that means is that you could have a really high IQ and really not be creative at all. So you need a certain level of intelligence in order to have creativity, but it's not a sufficient condition, meaning that you don't necessarily become creative with a higher IQ. Okay, and that will conclude video 2 on variations in intellectual ability.